a nuclear weapon powered by a live reactor, a missile that could scream across continents for hours at 3 times the speed of sound, a machine that could shake cities apart, contaminate the sky with radiation, and drop nuclear bombs along the way. Not science fiction, not a conspiracy theory, a real Cold War project. In 1957, the United States decided that nuclear bombs were just too polite. They wanted a weapon that didn't just end a war. They wanted something that made the very act of flying over enemy territory a catastrophe. This was Project Pluto. On paper, it was a cruise missile. In reality, it was a locomotive-sized unshielded nuclear reactor built to scream across the sky at 3 times the speed of sound. No shielding, no containment, just an open atomic furnace pushing a weapon designed to fly for thousands of miles without stopping. And yes, it also carried hydrogen bombs. But strangely, the bombs were not the most terrifying part. To understand why Project Pluto existed, you have to step into the mindset of the Cold War. In the 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a race unlike anything humanity had seen before. Every year brought a new technological breakthrough in weapons. Bigger bombs, faster bombers, longer-range missiles. And there was a terrifying strategic problem hiding underneath all of it. If nuclear war began, the side that struck first could destroy the other side's weapons before they ever left the ground. Bombers could be hit on their runways. Missile silos could be targeted before launch. Lose your nuclear arsenal in the first minutes of a war, and you would have no way to strike back. Military planners called this the first strike problem. So engineers and strategists started thinking about weapons that could survive that first attack. Weapons that could stay hidden, stay mobile, or simply be impossible to stop once launched. This was the strange logic that produced one of the most extreme engineering ideas of the Cold War. What if a missile didn't rely on fuel at all? What if its engine was powered by nuclear energy? The concept behind Project Pluto was brutally simple. Instead of burning fuel like a normal jet engine, the missile would contain a compact nuclear reactor. Picture a giant metal tube flying through the sky at supersonic speed. Air rushes into the front of the missile as it moves forward. In a normal jet engine, that air would mix with fuel and ignite. But in Project Pluto, the air would be forced directly through the heart of a nuclear reactor. Inside that reactor, uranium fuel was undergoing fission, splitting atoms and releasing enormous amounts of heat. Temperatures inside the reactor core could reach well over 1,000 degrees Celsius. As the incoming air passed through the reactor, it would heat up almost instantly. The air expanded violently and blasted out of the back of the missile. That blast created thrust. No gasoline, no jet fuel, just superheated air driven by nuclear fission. Engineers called this design a nuclear ramjet. And on paper, it had some remarkable advantages. First, range. Conventional missiles carry a limited amount of fuel. Once that fuel runs out, the flight ends. But a nuclear reactor can operate for days or even weeks. As long as air flows through the engine, it keeps producing thrust. In theory, a nuclear ramjet missile could fly across entire continents. Second, speed. The system worked best when enormous amounts of air rushed through the reactor core. That meant the missile was designed to fly extremely fast, around Mach 3, or 3 times the speed of sound. At that speed, it could cross hundreds of kilometers in minutes. Third, altitude. Instead of flying high like ballistic missiles, the weapon was designed to skim close to the ground, only a few hundred meters above the surface. Flying this low made radar detection much harder. Mountains, terrain, and the curvature of the Earth could hide the missile until it was already close. To anyone below, it would appear suddenly. a massive machine tearing across the sky faster than a rifle bullet. The missile itself was enormous, roughly the size of a small locomotive and weighing dozens of tons. Engineers called it SLAM, short for the Supersonic Low Altitude Missile. At the center of SLAM was the reactor that made everything possible. It had a name: Tory. Inside the reactor were hundreds of thousands of ceramic fuel channels arranged in a dense honeycomb structure. Air rushing through these narrow passages absorbed heat from the nuclear fuel and carried that heat straight out the back of the engine. Designing something like this pushed engineering to its limits, but astonishingly, it worked. In the Nevada desert, scientists built a massive test facility where they could run the reactor while blasting compressed air through it. From heavily shielded bunkers, engineers watched as the nuclear engine roared to life. A working nuclear ramjet, an engine that turned the atmosphere itself into fuel. By the early 1960s, the engineers behind Project Pluto had done the impossible. They built a working nuclear ramjet. The Tory reactor ran successfully, and the missile designed to carry it, the Supersonic Low Altitude Missile, or SLAM, looked feasible. In theory, it could launch, accelerate to supersonic speed, and fly across continents without ever running out of fuel. But once the system was fully understood, something unsettling became clear. The missile itself was only part of the weapon, because Project Pluto was designed to cause destruction long before it dropped a single bomb. The first danger was speed. SLAM would fly at about Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound, while skimming just a few hundred meters above the ground. At that altitude, its shock waves would slam directly into the surface below. Every supersonic aircraft produces a sonic boom, usually just one as it passes overhead. But SLAM would generate a continuous wall of shock waves as it roared across the landscape. Each blast would strike the ground like an invisible hammer. Windows could shatter, roofs could collapse, entire neighborhoods could shake under repeated pressure waves. But the sonic boom was only the beginning. To keep the engine light enough to fly, engineers removed the heavy shielding normally used in nuclear reactors. Air rushing through the missile passed directly through an exposed nuclear core. The air heated instantly and blasted out the back as thrust, but it also carried radiation. As the missile flew, it would leave behind a trail of contaminated exhaust, an invisible ribbon of radioactive particles stretching across its entire flight path. And then there were the bombs. SLAM could carry up to 16 hydrogen bombs, releasing them one after another as it crossed enemy territory. Fast, low, nuclear-powered. The missile would have been extremely difficult to stop. Project Pluto was not just a missile, it was a machine designed to turn the sky itself into a weapon. If Project Pluto sounds absurd today, it helps to remember the world in which it was imagined. The late 1950s were some of the most anxious years of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union both had nuclear weapons, and both were racing to build more. Every new bomb or missile on one side created fear on the other. And beneath all of it was a terrifying question. What happens if nuclear war actually begins? Military planners believed the first minutes would decide everything. Bombers could be destroyed on their runways. Missile silos could be struck before launch. Entire arsenals might disappear before they ever had the chance to respond. So the goal changed. It was no longer enough to build powerful weapons. You had to build weapons that could not be stopped. Weapons that would survive the first strike and guarantee retaliation no matter what. Project Pluto fit perfectly into that logic. A missile powered by a nuclear reactor could fly across oceans without refueling. It could approach from unexpected directions. And flying low and fast, it would be extremely difficult to intercept. To military planners, that meant something crucial. Even if other nuclear forces were destroyed, weapons like SLAM could still get through. This idea became the foundation of Cold War strategy. It was called Mutually Assured Destruction, MAD. The concept was brutally simple. If both sides possessed enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other completely, then neither side could safely start a war. Peace would be maintained not by trust, but by the certainty of catastrophe. But technology moved quickly. By the early 1960s, intercontinental ballistic missiles could deliver nuclear warheads across the planet in less than 30 minutes. They were faster, simpler, and easier to deploy. Compared with them, Project Pluto suddenly looked complicated and unpredictable. In 1964, the program was cancelled. The reactors had been built, the engines had run, but the missile was never deployed. Still, the fact that it came this close reveals something unsettling. Project Pluto was not born from madness. It was born from fear. Project Pluto was never deployed. The missiles were never launched. The flying reactors never crossed continents. On paper, the project ended quietly in the 1960s. But the idea itself still says something unsettling about us. Because Project Pluto was not designed by villains or mad scientists. It was built by brilliant engineers, careful physicists, and rational military planners. People solving technical problems step by step, using the best knowledge they had. And that is what makes it so strange. Human ingenuity, the same force that builds hospitals, satellites, and particle accelerators, can also produce machines designed to spread destruction across entire continents. Project Pluto existed because of fear. The fear that if one side did not build the ultimate weapon, the other side would. So engineers created a missile powered by a nuclear reactor, a machine that turned the air itself into part of the attack. It was never used.